Hello and welcome to today's choice event. I'm super happy to see already many of you, but I'm sure some more are going to join in the next few minutes. I'm Lara, one of the co-founders of the Climate Choice, and I'm going to slowly start with this today's webinar and walk you through what's going to happen in the next hour during our lunch break. And what we're going to talk about. So the topic today is actually to look behind the business model of the circular economy, which we had as a topic in the last months. Today we're going to talk with Georgina, whom I've seen here, but she's probably waiting a few more seconds. With Georgina from SYSTEMIQ Capital and before we go into that, sorry, I'm just now a little bit surprised that we saw her already. Before we look into that, I want to acknowledge in which time we are actually meeting today. And I think it's probably present for all of us. So I'm not surprising you. And I don't want to just have it in the room without talking about it. So we are very much aware that in the last week, there came a new topic into this modus of crisis that we are all facing. And it's probably very hard to digest. And I hope all your family and friends and colleagues and so on are well and hopefully healthy. But we were also thinking about why and how and if we do our choice webinars in these times. But actually, I have been sharing it also online. What we came to an conclusion is really that all these topics that are in the outside world right now happening really show us that it's super important to come together. We always talk about our climate community, but it's probably in all other communities as well, or businesses or decision makers, people who are interested to really acknowledge what's all happening and to see that all these different topics put us in a situation where it's especially now time to make a difference and to really think about in which of these topics, or maybe all combined, you can tackle an important challenge and where you can become active. So for us, it's really also in these choice events, all about building community, bringing people together, decision makers who maybe want to in their company take a step forward, but also very welcome in your private life or wherever you can make an impact, to really bring these different topics together, to show empathy, to take responsible decisions, and to really work along social, environmental, and climate impact. So just having said that in the beginning, you can, hopefully enjoy this lunch break and really take one part of it, even though we will mainly talk about our topic, which is climate. I really invite you also to share, like, along the whole webinar, what you are maybe having as thoughts. You also gonna find today another solution towards climate, but then also you have the chance here in the chat, actually, which you find on the bottom or on the top, to write whatever comments you have. Maybe you just want to take now the chance to introduce yourself, so you can maybe just write from where you're watching this webinar. And you can for sure also share, like, your thoughts about the situation or what is going on in your mind. And we really invite you also to find out as community what are next steps. So it's not all on us to share insights, but we are very curious to also see what's going on with you. So I would take a small break and see if someone would like to start in the chat, so that we are just also using this function. So maybe someone from the audience, if you like to just share from which location you're watching today, or how you're feeling. I don't see anything yet. So maybe you have to find it. This is a Q&A session on the bottom or on top, and everyone from the audience should have the function and you can write into it. Cool. I see the first ones joining from Berlin, from Hamburg, from Constance. Great. So from London, Oslo. Awesome. Really happy to have you here. And you found out how the chat is working here. You also got via email an invitation to join our Slack. So just also after the event, you can connect there, share your insights, and work along together towards impact. And yeah, having said all these words as an introduction, today webinar is about another topic of decarbonization and climate, even if it is more one that is maybe not so obvious to us sometimes. We have been talking about the circular economy before, and today we have Manuel from SYSTEMIQ and Georgina from SYSTEMIQ Capital, who I will invite in a second. And they're going to let us all know what this topic has to do with impact and climate. And before that, I introduce to you today's poll. So you should see now on your screen this survey, and you can all become part of it or active, and let us know from which role you are joining today, so that Georgina and Manuel also know whom they are presenting to. So either you join out of a position as a founder from a startup, which is maybe today very interesting as well, or as an CEO from a company, or from procurement, sustainability, marketing, and so on. And I see already quite a lot of people, more than 80 have answered already. So I give you a few more seconds. And I stop now. And you should see all the results. So today we actually have a lot of people joining from startups, also consultants, and just some of you are today, so like 12% CSRs or sustainability managers. Normally that is quite a big chunk, but that is also great to see, like from every webinar we have different people joining. And then our second question would be around the circular economy. So you see it now. Maybe what is your perspective on that topic in your work? Does it have a large extent? Is it impacting a lot your work? Is it rather a small one, or it's not really something you work with, but you're planning to? Or there are no current plans for it, but you're like interested, I guess, into the topic. So last seconds. And I'm going to show it. So most of you have answered it has a large impact on your work. So maybe, as we had also a lot of startup founders, that is maybe how you address it, but you're happy to or I invite you to share it also in the Slack maybe, or here in the chat function, and let us know how you're working on the whole thing. So Georgina, Manuel, I am happy to invite you to the stage, and I guess you can hear and see me. Great. Hello, Manuel, and hello, Georgina. So how are you both today?
That's a heavy question, Laura.
Okay, then I'm just happy to have you.
Yeah, I mean, given all the recent events, it's tough to say that we're doing well, right? But I think we're very honored to be here today. Yeah,
and thanks a lot for joining. That is a great one.
Thank you for inviting us. Good to see that we have such a diverse group of people here on the line. So thank you all for joining as well.
Yeah, great. And I'm going to be listening and joining, and I'm going to be very excited also to see the questions in the chat. So everyone feel free to already put them in there, but and you can already comment also on other people's questions maybe. And then in the end, we're going to collect them. And in the last 10-15 minutes, I'm going to come back and go into this Q&A. And until then, I'm happy to hear what you know all about everything as a service.
Well, thank you for the invitation again, Lara, Florian, and the whole team. Welcome again from my side. I'm Manuel. I'm a director at SYSTEMIQ, and since 2.5 years, building the Munich office or the German office here together with my colleagues. A few more words about SYSTEMIQ. So SYSTEMIQ, it's a system change company. Essentially, we combine being a think tank and a consulting firm, and we try to push for sustainable systemic transformations, basically in 4 areas: the energy space, the materials space, food and land use system, and the sustainable finance area. And for each of those 4 areas, we call them systems, we have a theory of change, or a vision, you could call it, of what should happen to make these systems more sustainable and compatible with the Paris goals. And then, like, basically, this is always our North Star, and we do different types of projects with philanthropic organizations, with coalitions, we build partnerships, or we work in one-on-one interaction with companies. You know, different types of projects that always contribute to that respective system vision. That's the idea. Today, we'll share some thinking around a report which we published a few weeks ago. This was part of our materials platform work and the wider circular economy work, where I'm particularly active in. It titles XaaS. It's not the most elegant title, but it at least did its job in raising curiosity and convinced some of you to join the webinar today. So thank you again for this, and I hope you look forward to it. We are 5 years old, 350 people currently in London, Munich, Amsterdam, Paris, Jakarta, and Sao Paulo. Georgina, over to you for a quick introduction of Systemic Capital.
Thank you, Manuel. It's really nice to be here today. I work at SYSTEMIQ Capital, which is the investment partner of SYSTEMIQ Limited. So SYSTEMIQ Capital invests in early stage technologies and business models with the potential to disrupt key climate systems. We invest in areas that are synergistic with the work that is done at SYSTEMIQ Limited. And one of our key investment focus areas is sustainable food materials. And within that space, everything as a service models is absolutely critical, right? We need to very quickly figure out a way to decouple resource production from GDP growth. And this is where these service models play a critical role. Over to you, Manuel, to get started on the presentation.
All right. I will share my screen in a second, but let us first get started a little bit with an overall introduction around what are we talking about. So everything as a service, XaaS, it's essentially a business model innovation. And this business model focuses on selling services or outcomes that products offer instead of the products themselves. So not selling high volumes of products in the fire and forget mode, but rather focusing on the performance and the outcomes, the utility that the customers are interested in. For example, if Trumpf, the iconic German machinery company, is offering a model where the customers can rent the laser cutting machine or pay based on the parts produced, they call this a pay per part model, and that is an XaaS example. If Michelin doesn't sell tires, but tires as a service, based on the passenger kilometers traveled. If Hilti doesn't sell drilling machines, but runs tool fleets for their customers as a service. If Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte is building a startup where students or shared apartments can rent the washing machines instead of buying them, or the fridges. Or if Philips doesn't sell light bulbs anymore, but offers light as a service. Or a more long-standing example of Rolls-Royce, which also offer turbines in a model, like turbines for airplanes, in a model which is called power by the hour, also kind of outcome-based business model. So all these examples, they are reality. Some are older, many of them are quite new. And there is a whole wave of pilots and experiments happening right now, done by incumbents, larger companies, but also a lot of startups exploring that space. We call that XaaS, everything as a service. It is a circular business model, and it can be a real game changer for a more sustainable circular economy if it is designed right. And this is the really critical part of it. So this is, I think, what we want to explore today together with you. Essentially, it's around three questions. First, what does XaaS mean? What is happening right now in that market environment? And how can it be an enabler for a regenerative economy? Second, how to design XaaS models in a way that it optimizes decarbonization potential, but also the business impact. And thirdly, what trends and investment opportunities are emerging here when you take an entrepreneurial lens and an investor perspective to that ecosystem. Let me quickly share my screen. So essentially, there are two lenses that I always like to take when looking onto this topic. The first lens, the first perspective, it's the circular economy lens. We are here today as part of the Climate Choice event, right? Many of you here are leaders in climate action within your companies or beyond. I saw there are quite a lot of founders, but also consultants. So, and most of you have a change agenda of how you want to contribute, right, to this climate problem. We all know the IPCC report that has been published this Monday. Many of us, we believe in the IRP figures that 50% of the emissions that are caused, they are caused by resource extraction and processing, and this is growing. Many resources, they move into manufacturing products. Industrial emissions are significant, as you can also see here on the screen, across multiple sectors. Climate action requires these companies to take a full scope perspective and a full life cycle responsibility. At the same time, in many areas, we see massive inefficiencies happening in some of our systems out there. Just a few examples. Here on the left, you see, cars are parked on average 92% of the time. 50% of inner city land is used for traffic infrastructure. And that is, I would say, not a really efficient use of the resources that we put into our mobility system in that example. On the right-hand side, currently 78% of the plastic waste is either landfilled or incinerated in Europe. 45% of today's leakage of plastics into the ocean is from rural areas where collection economics just don't work yet, where there is no infrastructure in place. So, and these are real systemic problems, and we call them structural waste essentially in our systems. And if you take the example on the right, regulatory stimuli, like we saw yesterday being decided by the UN Environment Programme, they are extremely important. But for how to get there on a national and on a company level, we really require the circular economy, a vision and an operating system for a more regenerative economy, an economy that focuses on maximizing resource productivity at its core, and an economy that does not know waste, essentially. So the core idea is to maximize resource productivity. And I think many of you are already using the concept, as I saw in the survey, but let's double click on it a little bit more together now. So we require the circular economy to decarbonize, to dematerialize, to tackle systemic challenges, and to essentially decouple growth from resource consumption. And this requires a complexity of measures and new business models behind the circular economy paradigm. And these business models, you see them here, and we summarized it on taking this lens in 5 clusters. On the left-hand side, you see circular business models coming from the supply side. So one type of circular business models can be to focus on creating circular supply chains using more sustainable materials, particularly around materials that can safely re-enter the environment or can be controlled. Another set of circular business models can focus on material recovery, such as recycling, waste to energy, and others. But the supply side is not enough. Oftentimes, when talking about circular economy, it's a lot about the supply side. But to really solve that problem of resource use, resource productivity, we need to look into the demand side as well, what you see here on the right-hand side. How we use goods. Sharing platforms, for example, can be a circular business models that allow for increased usage rate, high utilization. Extending product lifetime is another model, the right to repair, use products much longer, resale, remanufacturing mechanisms. And then what you see here in the dark blue, service-based business models. What we call everything as a service, as a most ambitious type of circular business models. And why is that the case? XaaS models, they combine a tangible product with an intangible service to meet specific users or societal needs. I explained a few examples earlier. Mobility is such a need. We don't need cars, we need mobility essentially. Or housing, we don't need refrigerators, but fresh and healthy food. We don't need washing machines, but clean clothes. So in XaaS models, producers, typically they retain the ownership of the product and they are responsible for the life cycle. And when they do that, they are incentivized towards incorporating thinking around maintenance, repair, reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishment, recycling, thinking about what happens end of life. And when they take that responsibility, when they focus on setting outcomes, they try to optimize for a high utilization. That's the key driver of the business model then. The design for a longer lifetime is then a key criteria to make that more productive business models. So products that can be used more intensively. So keeping producer ownership is a fundamental incentive alignment needed to foster circular economy thinking. And this is why this is actually the most ambitious circular business models, as you think many of the other levers you see here together with that model. So this was the circular economy lens, the first perspective that I told you. What you see here in the yellow box. Now let's take the second perspective, and that's the perspective from the pink box in the bottom. That's the perspective from many industries right now. Global market dynamics are challenging. Competitive pressure is increasing. New sources of growth and differentiation are needed. Supply chains need to strengthen their resilience and transparency. We have seen this particularly driven through times like the pandemic. Customers demand deeper relationships. There is a servitization shift happening. Companies need to find new ways for a competitive edge. Servitization means that more and more value is generated by services, such as subscription models or pay-per-use models. And this idea is not new. It has been around since the 70s. But what we see right now is really an uptake happening in many markets out there. And this is particularly enabled here by the green box, by the development around digitalization over the last 15 years. Over the last 15 years, digitalization and Industry 4.0 have fundamentally transformed operations in many industries. And this is the new normal, this is unstoppable, and the basis for reinventing business models and the basis for building really good models around servitization and the circular economy. So XaaS models, they are exactly at that eye of the storm. They can be a really powerful climate compatible solution. They can deliver both environmental benefits, but also more economic value. But the crucial point is that they are designed right. So in our cases, which I will present later, we calculated a few examples of really ambitiously designed business models in that context. And that showed us that these models can, in our cases, decarbonize by up to 65% on a product level, and up to 40% they can save TCOs when you look at the final cost of how the product can be offered to customers. So it is basically a model that allows to optimize for both the environmental benefits, but also the economic advantages. Currently, we see strategic shifts to XaaS models in many areas and across sectors. We're following this environment since about a year, and it's an extremely vibrant ecosystem. We see more and more products being offered as a service. I talked about a few examples earlier, but there are many more of larger companies, but also startups experimenting with that, building new offerings from fashion to construction to kids' toys. There's basically no limits in that area. And so these are real offerings of product being offered as a service, but there is also a massive space of supporting innovation. So innovators building solutions that enable others to offer products as a service. So, for example, insurance solutions, ERP systems, IoT solutions to allow products to be traced. So there's a whole ecosystem of enabling innovation needed to really enable building XaaS offerings. In that ecosystem, what you see here, and you don't need to be able to read everything, and I will also share the document later if you're interested in the details. But in that ecosystem, what you see companies that are quite ambitious when it comes to the sustainability impact they want to have. But there are also many companies who don't have that ambitions at all, who do not optimize for sustainability. And we talked to quite a lot of companies over the last year. So many of these producers that build these models, they come from the pure economic motivation and are often stalled by the complexity of design choices when building that. Many neglect the environmental potential they could have, most of the time due to a lack of awareness, due to the change it induces when they really design these models ambitiously. For example, because you might need to change product design. Or in the worst case, if you're not aware of these effects, this can result in negative rebound effects on the system level. So we think it's quite important to build this awareness in this ecosystem about the environmental benefits that could be created around the circular economy concept. So after looking into this ecosystem, we decided that in our study, we want to build a toolkit. We want to build a toolkit that enables companies to walk through the key elements of designing XaaS systems in an ambitious way to deliver both economic and environmental benefits. And for this, we basically came up with 4 building blocks. And these 4 building blocks, you see them here in the middle. It's the sustainable value proposition design, business model and financial design, product and operating model design, and the ecosystem design. And I will very quickly run through these to give you a little bit of a flavor. But if you really want to go deep, as I said, I think it's good to look into the report where we also support that with quite a lot of examples. So let's take the first one, the pink hexagon, sustainable value proposition design. This means developing a user-centric value proposition and impact ambition early on. So a clear value proposition that focuses on the customer problem. So not the product only that is already there, but really going back to the essential problem. So for example, if you take a company selling soap dispensers or disinfection dispensers, this does not mean building a subscription model around that product, but going back to the customer problem of hygiene and taking this as a basis for designing the product service bundle. What we mean with impact ambition, so basically we say we need to combine that value proposition with an impact ambition early on. So basically defining a contribution that you can have to design a wider, more sustainable industry that you're in. So for example, if you take a car manufacturer, based on the logic we just explained, a car manufacturer has to decide on how to sell mobility. That's the underlying need, getting from A to B. So the car usage or the passengers kilometer traveled. But what we mean with impact ambition is that the company also needs to define what is the role in the wider mobility system transition that is happening, how to integrate your solution, for example, with other modes of transport to enable people to get more sustainably from A to B. So that's the idea around sustainable value proposition design and an impact ambition. The second hexagon, the blue one here, we call business model and financial design. There are different archetypes of XaaS business models. There's quite a range, and I cannot go into depth here. But there are, for example, use-based business models that you know from car sharing or your bike sharing solution that you're using, but also result-oriented or output-oriented business models. And they are often considered as the most sustainable models because they essentially combine an important incentive alignment. Let me give you one example. If you take a fertilizer company, and the fertilizer company would decide not to sell fertilizer anymore, but to charge based on the yield that is generated on a field for the farmer, for example. So not charging based on the fertilizer sold, but the yield that is generated. This would basically be an ideal alignment of incentives because the outcome is essentially what the farmer needs and what he wants. And incentive for the fertilizer company is basically to maximize that, but also to maximize that by using, not selling as much fertilizer as possible, but using that economically much more efficient. The fertilizer becomes a cost driver in that offering for the fertilizer company. So they would try to maximize the yield while minimizing the fertilizer application. So that's just an example of how result-oriented business models can combine an important incentive alignment. There is no silver bullet to designing the right business model. It really needs to be tailored to the product, to the situation, to the company. So it's really something very specific. But there is one critical point that is important to consider here. And this is the financial model that is accompanying that. The financial model that needs to mitigate the risk that is generated. Oftentimes in XaaS models, risk is shifting from the consumer to the producer. So you need to find a way of how to tackle that risk shift. So there is a funding and financing risk to it because one-off revenues need to be compensated through incremental revenues over time, which can be much more attractive, but it might take a period of time to make that more attractive. But also operating risks. So what happens if the product fails? And the liability is then on the provider. So these are examples where you need to define a good financial model that can cover that risk. And we see examples being created in the markets where providers, they partner with insurance companies, for example, to offer something. The third building block, it's the product and operating model design. And here I double click quickly because that's at the core, the link to many circular economy levers or circularity levers that you might be familiar with and that you might use in your projects or in your companies. So what we want to say with the third bucket here is that simply switching the business model is not enough. Unleashing the full economic and environmental benefits, particularly, this requires really building a circular product and a circular operating model into that XaaS offering. So essentially pulling a set of levers along the full life cycle. So in the build phase, developing products that are of higher quality, that can perform along the lifetime, optimizing material supply. In the use phase, improving repair, maintenance for a better availability or for increased utilization. But also in the loop phase, something which might not be familiar at all to companies that sell products. So considering the loop phase, what happens at end of life? Do you have a take-back scheme? How you think about reuse or refurbishment options? or even remanufacturing or recycling systems that you can build or that you plug yourself into. So to really effectively reduce the environmental impact that the products have through XaaS models, it's quite important to understand where the emissions occur along the lifetime of a product and along the supply chains. So I think that solutions like the climate choice, solutions like you are building here, Lara, they can have an important contribution here of creating that transparency that is needed. Oftentimes the emissions of products, and you know that, right, is actually in the use phase of the product. More than 50% for computer ICT equipment. In a classic combustion engine car, it is more than 80% typically in the use phase. And to optimize that in an XaaS offering is not easy, and it might even require to go beyond the boundaries of your company and your offering right now. So you need to build the right partnerships to create these models. And building the right partnerships is the core idea of the building block number 4, what we call ecosystem design. So ecosystem design, very quickly, this means, first of all, the intra-organizational ecosystem. In many companies, particularly if you talk about large companies that want to build such models, it can be quite complex and quite challenging. New capabilities might be needed. You might even want to decide if you want to build this internally, like Hilti is doing it, or externally, like Bosch is doing right now, where they decided, look, we want to test that first in a spin-off and then integrate it if successful. The most important part is what is marked here by the green dotted line, is what we call the solution ecosystem. So this means that you might build up the right partnerships to offer that XaaS product service bundle. So you might need a partnership with an IT or IoT company or insurance company, because some of the things you might be able to not be able to build in-house at the pace that you want to have it. And the third layer of ecosystem design is the wider macro ecosystem of how to partner with other players in the system. All right. So one thing that is quite important to state here is that if you really want to build such a model in an existing organization, but even as a startup, we believe it's quite important to run a solid analysis and quantify a quite ambitious case to have like a North Star of where this offering, could maximize the impact. And what we did in our study is to just take 3 examples to calculate how can these offerings be designed to maximize decarbonization potential, but also improve the TCO, the total cost of ownership at which the product can be offered. So essentially, we calculated 3 cases. The first one, shifting to car as a service, can be an important element for shaping the future of sustainable mobility. Second, machinery and equipment as a service, that can be important to improve the resource productivity in manufacturing. And the third, white goods as a service, your washing machine, your dishwasher, your fridge, and offering that as a service can be a driver for resource productivity in the domestic households. And I will just run through that very, very quickly. So looking into the 3 cases, as I said, we look at decarbonization potential on the top line, basically the CO2 per utility that the product offers, and the bottom line, the TCO, total cost of ownership of the product or the utility that you want to have from the product. So in the car as a service case, what we found is that shifting to a circular car subscription model could reduce CO2 emissions caused by a battery electric vehicle of up to 25% at a similar TCO level. And building on top of that, a carpooling solution could decarbonize by up to 45%, with a significant TCO improvement of almost 40%. But that's important to state, is that this is only possible if lifetime of products is extended, higher utilization is created, and an end-of-life material recovery system is put into place, so that essentially half of the cars meet the same mobility demand as we have right now in our system. Second example, the machinery example, that's the middle pillar here. So it's called equipment as a service in machinery, and its market expected to grow at 35% right now per annum. And in our case, we partnered with a company to calculate the case, and we looked at the metal laser cutting machine. And scenario 1.0 basically puts that machine into a pay-per-part model, which could decarbonize by up to 37% due to increased utilization and reducing the scrap that is generated on the machines through better, basically optimization of the sorting of the plates. And scenario 2.0, this basically builds a demand pooling marketplace on top of that to further increase the utilization. And there is one really insightful example from that case, because in shifting the machine to the service-based offer, basically the sphere of influence is much bigger for the company that provides the offer. And you control also the scrap, the waste that is generated on the machine, and optimizing that waste, that scrap, creating closed material loops around it. This can be a significant impact lever. And then very quickly, the last example, the white goods as a service example. And here we focus on the washing machine as basically the most resource intense domestic appliance in your household. And so a washing machine, if maintained well, can easily have a lifetime of up to 15 years, the housing even longer. So basically the operating model should be also designed for that. So in a circular subscription model, this could improve the CO2 footprint by 24% with a higher lifetime and a higher resource productivity through maintenance support, through increased efficiency and material recovery. And on top of this, a pooled pay-per-wash model, where, for example, people share the washing machine in their houses, obviously could lift up the utilization and decarbonize up to 35%. So this is just a very quick snapshot on this case. If you want to understand more about it or discuss about it, feel free to reach out. We will share our contact details later on. So shifting to XaaS, it's essentially a pro-market, a pro-growth, and a pro-technology agenda. And it is not easy, and it will not happen by itself. It requires support, and it requires three things at least to help the system become as impactful as we describe it here. The first thing is that it requires a strong digital infrastructure, for example, to track and trace products along supply chains. The second thing is policy making, so the right policy interventions around CO2 pricing, but also eco-design. And then the last thing is essentially partnerships among companies and enabling basically actors to work on that. And enabling actors also entails to the entrepreneurship scene and to the investment scene, which needs to support such models. And here I would like to hand over to Georgina for a quick perspective on how a venture capital investor is looking onto this topic.
Thanks so much, Manuel. Let's go to the next slide. Right, so I'll quickly share the way that we typically look at everything as a service startups. There are different definitions of startups in this space, but I'm going to broadly be covering the kind of pay-per-use model. So first of all, why is this business model particularly relevant for VC? The first point to make is that these models are typically much more capital efficient than traditional manufacturing companies. So as a VC, it's actually quite difficult to make the case to invest in a typical manufacturing CapEx heavy model because it takes so much more capital to scale, right? So to scale a manufacturing business into a unicorn, you need, say, $300 million, right? Which heavily dilutes founders and initial shareholders. Everything as a service models will require, say, 50 million or 100 million to get that to a unicorn. So that capital efficiency is really, really key to a VC in looking in this space. The second point to make is that we'd be looking for companies with higher profit margins than traditional manufacturing companies. So typically with everything as a service models, you'll see revenues that are more predictable, often recurring. And really what you're seeing is, what you want to see is, a kind of fixed CapEx base, maybe a little bit lower than what would look like for a manufacturing business, but and the kind of utilization rate becomes really key because the more you utilize that asset, the more you grow your profit margins. And then the third point to make here is that these the space can really open up opportunities for business innovation. And that's both business innovation within the ecosystem around the everything as a service model, right? So as Manuel was mentioning earlier, you will find new financing mechanisms, new insurance opportunities, all of these different business models that can pop up around a super successful everything as a service model, which then presents new investment opportunities for VC players like us. But it also allows the company in question that is offering the service to innovate more rapidly, right? Because it's much easier to change and adapt a software solution than a hardware product, right? So that allows companies to be a lot more innovative, a lot more flexible, cater to various changing market demands, which again is something that's very attractive for VCs. Especially investing at an early stage, you want to see companies really be able to adapt to changing markets. Key considerations for investment. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of kind of what we look at when we look at these models. So the first thing is, of course, enhanced customer experience. So what are we looking for? One of the things we look at is the kind of pay per use of the end consumer. So what are they paying per use of a product when they don't own it versus when they do own it? And if they are paying more for the use of that product, we want to see additional benefits around that product. So maybe to give you a quick example, if you have like a shampoo bottle, for instance, and it's a disposable shampoo bottle, then your pay per use will factor in the price of that cheap plastic that you're disposing of every single time. If you have a reusable shampoo bottle that's going to last 100 different fills, then suddenly your pay per use is going to go down quite significantly because you're not paying for that cheap plastic anymore. You also want to look at maximizing the convenience and user experience. This is again actually a really important point for container reuse companies. We've turned down quite a few investments in this space where we feel that the convenience of the consumer is not optimized, right? If we find that actually the consumer every time has to go refill to a refill station to go refill their containers, come back, wash everything themselves, then our belief is that that addresses a niche market and not a mass market. And then the third point to make is that trust is really, really important, especially for consumers who are not owning the product, don't necessarily know who's used the product before, what the quality is when they receive it, right? So that trust element is really, really important. And then in terms of metrics, we'll look at typical SaaS metrics, right? ARR, bookings, churn, renewals, etc. But then we'll also look at metrics such as utilization rate, right? So if you take shared mobility, for instance, we would look at the vehicle passengers per hour and then benchmark that across competitors. We want to look at total cost of ownership. Again, Manuel, you mentioned this, and I think the key is to get that balance right in between CapEx and OpEx, because your OpEx might go up quite significantly in having to service the product and having to clean the product and having to dispose of it at the end of life, etc. So getting that balance right is really key. And then, of course, if you're looking at impact, you have to look at the materials and the CO2 avoided. And our mindset is, okay, well, how can we minimize the CO2 per usage? A couple of areas that we're looking at right now, we're very focused on the whole mobility as a service for, again, the reasons that Manuel mentioned. On-demand pooled transit is gaining a lot of popularity both in Europe and in the US. There are very strong regulatory tailwinds. So this is very interesting for us. We're starting to look at plastic reuse. So there are incoming regulations in both Germany and France coming about this decade that will see this market grow. And then there are a couple of other areas, but for the sake of time, I'll move to the next slide. So just quickly, these are enabling technologies that accelerate the adoption of everything as a service models, and therefore we also look at these enabling technologies. We would make standalone investments in these technologies if we feel that they're broadly applicable to various everything as a service models. But mainly these are IoT or sensing technologies, which enable real-time feedback on the asset itself to the asset owner and to any third parties that are involved, like an insurance company or a financing company, etc. AI, machine learning. So what you want to be doing here is you want to be aggregating metadata from the product and various products that have been issued in the past to as well as you can construct a kind of digital twin of that product, right? So that you can very, very accurately monitor, analyze, and optimize the product that's in circulation with its users. And then distributed ledger technology or kind of blockchain. I think blockchain sometimes rubs people a little bit the wrong way, but what's really, really important here is the immutable proof of where the product has been, how much it's been used, what is the quality, what quality can the consumer expect when they're using the product. Also, this helps with supply chain transparency, right? Where were the components of the product sourced from? Were they ethically sourced? What is the CO2 footprint of these, right? And it's what I was mentioning earlier. The trust element is so important, and so blockchain technology can really enable that kind of layer of trust. I'll stop here and thank everyone for your attention. We are all about collaboration, both at SYSTEMIQ and at SYSTEMIQ Capital, and I'm really excited to see that 22% of the audience is startups and founders, and I know that this will reach a much broader audience. So looking forward to connecting.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Georgina and Manuel, for giving us, I think, a very good view into this world. I think, when you hear this word, everything as a service, it sounds like a little bit obvious, like you have a product, you make it a service, okay. But yeah, Manuel, I really loved that you shared this overview of really showing the whole model behind it, and like that you have this suppliers before whom you need to integrate whenever you create this new product service mix, that you have like maybe internal and external solutions to test, and then also to think a lot about the end of life, and maybe respecting the questions that we got. So first of all, thanks for answering already some in the chat. So now is also the time to everyone who's listening, maybe post in another question. We're gonna post in later also in the Slack, and for sure you can also comment on them. But maybe we point one out that was more or less 2 times there and voted upwards. So we talk about everything as a service, as a model for circular economy. And the people, Ferdinand and Bezat, were pointing out that the most critical point then probably are the reuse and end of life afterwards. So like maybe we can touch on that slightly, how you see this is like best done, what are best practices to really make sure that not only the lifetime is maybe increased, but then that you have really a good integration into end of life, not only recycling, but maybe reusing of different parts. Is there, I think Manuel, you were presenting it, is there something you can add on that?
Yeah, it's quite, thanks for the question. It's quite a spot on question because it highlights what we see out there, that in many companies that want to build the models, this can be something completely new. So thinking about creating the service-based offer, that's possible easily. But thinking about the whole end-of-life concept of how to get it back and what to do with that, that's something completely new. So that's not only the logistics, but also the manufacturing ecosystem and partnerships that might be needed, because you might import the products right now from far away, but it's collected a completely different place. So on a practical note, that's a spot-on question. And I think what we see is that larger companies that want to take this ambitiously, that they think about this in partnerships, that they right now, I know quite a few who are exploring, for example, for the reverse logistics, partnership models, even with competitors potentially, of how to get back products in an economic way, how to potentially build up reman plants, etc. So this is something which we observe. But also, I think important is to look at the new offerings that are being created by younger companies, by startups, which oftentimes don't have the legacy systems in place, the organizational legacy. They think that part often from the beginning, right? So from scratch, and it makes almost a little bit easier for them. So if you take a good example is I talked to Whirley, which is a toys as a service company from London. And they designed the model from scratch in that way. And you could say they are a toys as a service company. But after I talked to the founder, I thought, well, that's more a logistics company which they are building, because it's about like getting back and bringing stuff and optimizing how long the product is at the customer, how it's shared. Yeah, that would be my very short answer.
Yeah, thanks. I think that also touches on, there was another question, if you could share like an example of a business model that's running like this. And again, I think it really emphasizes that it's really like, and you now also said logistic, but yeah, really you're thinking your whole life cycle of the product and really in the loop of this supply chain that you have and that you might have for someone else. So maybe to find someone who's reusing parts. We are almost in the beginning, but I would touch on one question, which is very much connected for sure to our whole topic here. So like Klaus is asking if there is a specific model to get into the CO2 calculation for like, saving potentials of using this business model, if there's something you could advise how to look into that or how to calculate it.
We are happy to discuss around it. So Klaus, if you want to reach out directly, we can do that. I don't know a real tool out there right now. We are quite close to a startup which is building a ERP system for as a service mods, and they are right now building a computation logic for how to enable then the companies who use the tool to come up with an answer on footprint and carbon saved. But I don't know any tool in place that is capable of doing it right now. But happy to talk about the logic that we applied, and so we try to be very pragmatic, but still build on the most common databases and LCA logics that apply.
Okay, yeah, maybe it touches, I assume it touches a little bit on this problem of product carbon footprint calculation is not that easy, and then having it compared already with another solution is maybe, the shift that is difficult then. Maybe putting it together to some last words, Georgina, Manuel, what would be your advice? What is that you want to give out to the audience if they either have their own startup and want to see if they did everything right, or like you showed already the metrics, but what is maybe the biggest topic to have in mind? And if people join from a company and they want to get started with it, what are the things maybe you can choose? I think, Georgina, you were addressing specifically startups, and then Manuel, you can have maybe advices for someone in a company. What would be your next step to tackle, or what should they take out of today's session?
Thanks, Laura. So to answer the question as to kind of what you look at next, look, there are 1,000,001 opportunities in the world. It will kind of depend, if you have a specific area that you're focused on, you understand better, you may want to prioritize that. But I think you need to take a kind of systems lens on this, right? And you need to take a step back and understand what are the real tailwinds and what are the headwinds of each one of these different business models. Because as Manuel was mentioning, you need an entire ecosystem to change, right? The question earlier around how you properly dispose of these, how you properly dispose and recycle it's just one company can't do everything. It's going to be way too expensive, right? You need traceability solutions, you need waste analytics solutions, you need all of this stuff to come together. So I would really suggest strongly about looking at what's happening in the policy, what's happening with consumer sentiment, what's happening with corporates, and take that system lens view.
Thank you, Manuel. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think looking into this development, it is very emerging right now. So I see in 3 years, we will see like a massive uplift in these offerings. It's still early stage. And when I talk to the startups in that ecosystem, we often arrive at the point that we say the market is in a very interesting situation where the regulation is actually supporting these offerings more and more. So it's important to be aware of what's happening there. Sustainable Products Initiative regulation, carbon pricing, all affects the economic attractiveness of the models. But also the market is not yet educated enough on how to maximize the environmental benefits here. So my advice is, if you're a startup building around a solution around it, exchange with others on how to do it, because many questions are unsolved. And also, if you see offerings out there, push for the economic, not only for the economic side of things, but also think about how can this enable the environmental benefits that it can have. Because if it's not considered, it can even have negative rebound effects.
Yeah, also very good point to have in mind, but I guess that's an own webinar. So yeah, thanks of you too to give us all these insights and share your learnings with us. We are a little bit over the time, so people probably jump to the next call, but thanks also for the nice discussion and staying with us. And if you like, then see you in 2 weeks with the topic of solar systems and renewable decentral energy. And I think today we explored very nicely this intersection of people, planet, and profit. So that might also fit to the beginning. And have a good afternoon and happy rest of the week. I wish you both.
Thank you so much, Laura.